Good evening, PWCS families, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sienna Boyd, and I am the Supervisor for Family and Community Engagement. Today's session is Financial Aid Awareness. This presentation is offered in the requested languages of English and Spanish and will be recorded. We will turn on the interpretation globe once this slide is explained in all the requested languages. So if you're on your computer, look for the interpretation button on your control bar. Once you click on it, pick on the desired language, then your icon should change. If you're on your phone, click on the Join Audio and click Call over Internet. Click on the three dots and more. Click on the language interpretation and click on the language you want and done. At this time, we will have the Spanish interpreter review the slide.
Hola, muy buenas noches a todos. Muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros. Mi nombre es Janet Boyd. Yo soy la supervisora de participación familiar y comunitaria. Estamos aquí en las noches de series de participación familiar, en la noche de conocimiento de los apoyos financieros. Si usted está en su computadora y necesita interpretación, una vez que se prende el canal, van a poder ver en la parte baja de su pantalla un globo terráqueo. Al ver el globo terráqueo, ustedes van a poder dar clic al globo terráqueo y van a poder aceptar la interpretación en español. Si están en su teléfono móvil o un dispositivo móvil, ustedes van a poder también ver en la parte baja de su pantalla 3 puntos. Una vez que den clic a esos 3 puntos, van a poder ver la parte de interpretación. Escogen el canal y con eso podrían escuchar. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we will begin interpretation. You can click on the interpretation globe. We are going to ask you to please keep your device on mute. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A section using the button at the bottom of the toolbar. You can also type them in the chat. We will have someone monitoring the Q&A and the chat to ensure your questions are being answered. I would like to take this time to welcome and introduce one of our presenters for this evening. We have Ms. Anaid Shaver. She is the Supervisor of College and Career Services. Welcome, Ms. Shaver.
Thank you. Welcome, families. We're so grateful for you joining us this evening to learn about financial aid awareness. And I'm really excited to have my co-worker, Alyssa Bridges, who is our administrative coordinator in College and Career Counseling Services for our division. And we're really excited to have Mr. Jason Purrier, who is the director of the College Place, who's with us this evening to share his expertise and knowledge with us. And before he gets started, I just want to remind families, we are so excited to be hosting our second college fair that will be taking place at Osborne Park High School on Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. And guess what? Mr. Purrier is going to be there again to share some information during one of our Tiny Talks. So we invite you and welcome you to bring your family. We will have over 100 colleges that will be there to be able to talk with you about what they have to offer to help support students that are interested in that post-secondary planning of higher education. And it's never too early to come to start to gather information to help with that planning process. So we look forward to seeing you there. And with no further ado, I turn it over to Mr. Purrier to share his wonderful information about financial aid awareness. Thank you so much for being here, Jason.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me in, as always. Going to share my screen. And can you all see my presentation? Perfect. So this first screen is just for anyone that's interested in receiving more information from the College Place. You can scan this QR code or use the bit.ly site to sign up. No pressure to do so. It's just a way to follow with me if you want additional assistance and support. And as always, it's free support and guidance that's provided to any student or family that's navigating through the post-secondary journey. Our presentation this evening is focused on paying for college, with a particular emphasis on the financial aid forms and talking about the financial aid process you should be going through. And I'll touch briefly on the scholarship search, which is why I have it pinned at the bottom of the screen. And for those of you thinking about attending the college fair this Thursday, this will be a very similar presentation. So you don't have to attend this session and then come into the Tiny Talks on Thursday unless you want more information or you feel like you missed something the first time around. You want to ask me questions, you're more than welcome to attend the Tiny Talks on Thursday. But again, I'll cover everything that I will talk about on Thursday in this session this evening. And so the agenda, I'll spend the vast majority of our time this evening talking about the different financial aid applications you'll see and what you can do now to prepare yourself for the process that is forthcoming. I'll touch on scholarships and talk about ways that you and your students can stay motivated and engaged in this process of looking for scholarships as you work through, especially if this is senior year, as you work through this academic year. And I'll end with family discussions, one of my favorite parts of my presentations, and touch on things that I want students and their parents discussing as we navigate this process and push through applying to college and looking through the financial aid process. So in Virginia, very generally, these are the 4 different categories of financial aid applications that you'll see. For most students and for some students in this position as a senior, the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, will be the only form you may need to fill out in this process. So some colleges will only request this, and there'll be no additional documentation that you need to submit. It's just literally submitting your FAFSA. But one of the things that I always encourage students and families to do is, for every college or university that the student is applying to, please go through the financial aid website and make sure you're filling out all the forms that are being requested and that you're prepared ahead of time and you're submitting these forms well in advance of the priority deadlines for financial aid, because those priority deadlines are different than the deadlines for the application for undergraduate admission as well. From there's the Virginia Alternative State Aid application. And just to clarify, that's not for every Virginian to fill out. It is for any student that is in the Commonwealth of Virginia that's graduating from a Virginia high school, but that is ineligible to receive federal aid. So typically this is a student that's undocumented, or they previously had status here and they're now out of status in the US. That student would fill out the VASA for Virginia schools only, and they would fill out the FAFSA for any schools they're applying to outside of the Commonwealth. The CSS profile is another form that you may see in this process, mostly requested by private colleges, universities, and some scholarship foundations. And then last but not least, there are scholarship applications. Typically by mid-May, beginning of June, I'm getting calls from parents, usually moms, who ask me, Jason, I'm concerned, I'm worried. My son or daughter is going to start college in the fall, and we're looking at about a $10,000 gap between what financial aid has given us through that process and what the total cost of attendance is. And my first question is, typically, did you fill out applications for scholarships or applications for additional scholarships? And that's usually where the parent will be a little bit surprised, because they had the assumption that financial aid and the college would take care of everything. That's one of the first myths I want to dispel in this process. It is very rare for any individual college or university to take care of the total net price. What is the net cost for students? So the leftover value remaining after taking out any grants or scholarships, so money that doesn't have to be paid back. It is very rare for colleges to be able to cover that net cost 100%. There's a handful of colleges, universities in the US that can do that. There's a few in Virginia, but for the most part, for most students and families, there's going to be a gap. So you also have to fill out scholarship applications in addition to the paperwork that you're doing that's required for financial aid at any college or university that your student is looking at. For the FAFSA, for those who are seniors, if you're not already aware, since we're already in October, your FAFSA is not opening October 1st. Federal Student Aid announced towards the end of the summer that they were opening up on December 1st. There have been a handful of schools that have done some beta testing on the form, and the good news so far is it seems like a lot of the issues that were causing students and families problems last year with the FAFSA have been fixed. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that when from beta testing to when they launch the form December 1st, that we will see the same thing, that, you know, a lot of the issues were resolved. But when your form launches on December 1st, you'll have two options. And for anybody in the class of 2025, you want to make sure that you're filling out the 25-26 FAFSA. And that's true for those of you in the audience who may have students who are going into the next year of college. They'll be looking to fill out the 25-26 FAFSA. If you do fill out the 24-25 FAFSA by mistake, I always like to share with students and families that do that you just had a practice run at the FAFSA. It's not the end of the world. Colleges aren't going to frown on it. It's just data that won't be used. So each year when you log in to fill out this form, because you do have to do this every year that you're working through and earning progress towards your collegiate degree, you have to fill out your FAFSA each year. This is not a one-time thing. But when you go into this account, so first again, just make sure you're selecting the right form. If you have any questions about it, your college career counselor at your high school can help you make sure you select the right form. And if you're wondering what you can do now, since we have to wait until December 1st for this form, you can start the process by creating your federal student aid ID. The only person's status that matters in the process of applying for financial aid is the students. So as long as the student is a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or other eligible non-citizen, which I'll talk about in another slide or two, then the student and their parents can set up FSA IDs. It used to be a lot simpler. It used to be who the student lived with in terms of who would be identified as a contributor for their FAFSA. Now it's a little bit more complicated. Because what federal student aid will ask the student to do is in the 12 months prior to the time they're creating their FSA ID and then filling out their FAFSA form once that launches, who's a parent that has provided the majority of support in those previous 12 months. So for students who live with both biological parents who are still married, filing a joint tax return, pretty simple. One parent will be identified as a contributor, and the student contributor and parent contributor would add information to the form through their FSA IDs. For some parents who are married but filing separately in terms of taxes for whatever the reason, both parents will be identified as contributors for the student's FAFSA. And then if biological or adopted parents have separated or divorced, then it is possible that the parent that the student does not live with will be identified as the contributor for the FAFSA form. It all is about who has provided the most financial support in the 12 months prior to the time the form is being filled out for the student. These FSA IDs are unique to each individual. So if you have more recently finished your education, and or if you have federal student loans that you're still working on paying, you already have your federal student aid ID. On the same page, if you have children who are already in college or have matriculated through and graduated from college more recently, you already have an FSA ID as well. You can only ever have one of these IDs at one time because the FSA ID itself is tied to your name and your social security number as it appears on your social security card. Both for students and parents, when you're working on signing up for your FSA ID, use your social security card as reference in this process. As long as your social security card does not have stamped on it for work authorization only, you can use that information to sign up for an FSA ID. If your social security card has for work authorization only on it, and you have a pending status with USCIS, then you'll actually check off the box saying you don't have a social security number right now. And that will push you through the FSA ID process and include some identity verification questions on the back end. Otherwise, you work through this form and you use your FSA ID to access the FAFSA each year to provide your digital signature. Once students have borrowed money to pay for their education through federal student loans, they'll use this FSA ID to monitor those loan balances and once they go into repayment, and it provides continual account access year over year as well. And when you sign up for this account, both for students and their parents, I would advise, even though federal student aid gives you the option to choose, email address or phone number and/or to answer challenge questions, that you take advantage of all three ways to regain access to your account. There's also an app that you can download to give you access to your account. Right now, everything will feel fresh, especially for seniors who are working through this process for the first time. But a year from now, you may forget your login information. 4 years from now, when you're checking what your student loan balance is, if you haven't been keeping up with this information year by year, you will forget it. So give yourself multiple ways to access this information. Use an email address that's not tied to your school. For students, that's both your high school and the college or university that you enroll in. And for parents, use an email address that's not tied to your job. So personal email addresses that you'll have access to, essentially in perpetuity into the future. Same thing with phone number. Again, phone numbers change. So if you have an email address that you're using to give you access to this account and a phone number and you answer your challenge questions, if you get locked out at any point in the future, you give yourself multiple ways to access this information. But I'm going to go back to, I'll go to this slide next because again, only the student status matters in the process of who is eligible to receive federal financial aid. And as long as a student falls into one of the categories that are on this screen, then they're eligible to fill out the FAFSA, to submit forms for financial aid and receive federal, state, and institutional aid, regardless of their parent status here in the U.S. So obviously, if the student is a U.S. citizen, U.S. national, they're eligible for federal aid. But in addition to that, anybody here with permanent residency holds a green card. If they have a current arrival departure record, I-94, with the expiration date that's out in front of us in the future, meaning they were granted asylum, admitted as refugee, or conditional admittance into the U.S., they're eligible to receive federal aid. Same thing if there's a battered immigrant status visa that either they or their parent were admitted into the U.S. under, or if their parent has a T visa or the student has a T1 visa, all of these statuses are eligible to receive federal aid. So it's not just U.S. citizens or U.S. nationals, it's any student who falls into one of these categories. They are eligible to receive federal aid, and they can fill out the FAFSA and keep moving forward through the financial aid process, again, regardless of their parent status. I get that question a lot because we have a lot of mixed status families here in the Northern Virginia region. So again, it's only the student status that matters in the process of applying for financial aid. I'm going to go back a few slides for a moment to talk about what happens when you submit your FAFSA. Once the student contributor logs in, and a parent can start this form, but I've found, especially with the revisions that were made last year, that it works better if the student initiates the form and invites the parent or parents in to contribute. Everybody enters in their information through a portal that doesn't really show anything else to the other person. So students only see their information, parents only see their information. And the reason behind this is that for the IRS to approve of the process of directly transmitting information into the FAFSA, they wanted essentially different firewalls in place to protect information that was going into the form. So when students consent and approve to have their information confirmed by the IRS, whether they worked or not, it's about tax filing at that point. And it's prior year. So for the 25-26 FAFSA, it's the 2023 tax year information that will be pulled in. Students go through, fill out their information, approve and consent for that transfer to happen between the IRS and federal student aid. The information is sent over, it's encrypted, and then the parent can also contribute to the form. Same thing, they fill out their information, approve and consent for information to be transmitted directly into the form. It is possible to manually input information to the FAFSA, but I would encourage everyone, unless the form directs you to. There's a handful of situations where that will happen, but unless the form directs you to, I would encourage you to provide approval and consent for the information to be transmitted directly into your form. A question that may come up is, why do I have to approve and provide consent for this to happen? Technically, you don't, but if you don't, the student will only be considered for unsubsidized loans, and they will not be reviewed for any other federal aid they may be eligible for. So that's one of the requirements. You have to approve and consent for the student to be considered for all federal aid that is out there. So please keep that in mind as you're working through this form. they've cleaned up the language from last year to this year to make it clearer that that's what the student is agreeing to when they decline to provide consent, or if a parent declines to provide consent and approval for this transfer to happen. So I'm happy about that because it makes it a lot clearer what students and their parent contributors are agreeing to in this process of not having information transmitted directly, because that was one of the areas that tripped students and families up last year and resulted in delays in their forms being processed. I'm going to jump back ahead to a few slides, because after the FAFSA was submitted, generally once aid is determined and dispersed for the student applicant, these are the 4 primary areas that aid is dispersed from. The FAFSA will generate a student aid index, or SAI, for each successful applicant, and that will determine their eligibility for the first 2 grants on our screen. So the federal Pell Grant is determined by SAI only, or the student aid index, and that money follows a student whether they go to Nova, George Mason, Marymount, University of Columbia, they go to Miami, either in Florida or Ohio, go to California. No matter where they go, the Pell number will stay the same from one institution to another. The Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or FSEOG fund, is also dependent upon the student aid index, or SAI, but those dollars are given directly to colleges and universities to disperse to students as they determine is necessary. Those award amounts range from $400 to $4,000. On average in Virginia, the last few years, I feel like for any student who is FSEOG eligible, I've seen award amounts from $1,000 to $2,000. So I haven't seen anybody that's gotten the maximum more recently. Not to say that that hasn't happened, but those are typically the students who are reaching out with additional questions. I'll see their financial aid award letters and the awards that have been given out to them. But again, Pell, FSEOG, dependent upon the student aid index, which you can only receive for federal aid by filling out and completing your FAFSA. For the teacher education assistance for college and higher education, or TEACH grant, the student, if they're interested in becoming a teacher, they would work with the college or university that they've enrolled in to access those funds. There's a service requirement on the back end. And as long as the student teaches for 4 out of 8 years following their graduation and completion of their degree, that grant will always stay a grant. The word of caution that I'll add in here is if the student does not fulfill that service requirement, that TEACH grant becomes an unsubsidized loan with interest that will be added on from the time that grant was initially dispersed to the student. So just be careful. If the student knows they want to become a teacher, you can use the TEACH grant, help cover some of your educational expenses and complete the service requirement, and you're good. If there's any hesitation or uncertainty, think very critically before utilizing these funds to pay for your education, because again, if you don't complete the service requirement on the back end, that grant turns into a loan. This is the one grant that will turn into a loan. So the one place where free money could turn into money that you have to pay back down the road. So just be careful with this grant. And then last but certainly not least, the Iraq and Afghanistan service grant is for any student who lost a parent or guardian who was active duty at the time in service to our country following the events of 9/11. When they fill out their FAFSA and enter in their deceased parents' information, that will be confirmed both through the Department of Defense and Veteran Affairs. And that student's eligibility for those funds is not based on their student aid index. It's literally based upon their parent sacrifice at that point. From there, in terms of Pell eligibility, this is an area where I usually lose my Northern Virginia family. So just hang in there with me as we work through these numbers. But for a single parent household, for the adjusted gross income, this is where students will fall. If there's any on the first column to your left with dollar signs, anybody below that qualifies for full Pell. By family size, anybody between those two middle numbers will receive partial Pell. And then anybody above those numbers is not eligible for Pell for a single parent household. Similarly, on the next slide is for a 2-parent household. Same concept, so family size on the first column, and then max Pell is anything below that first column here with dollars and cents or dollar figures. Anybody between these two columns is Pell eligible, but they will not receive maximum Pell. And again, anybody above these ranges based on their family size is not eligible for Pell, but that does not mean you're not eligible for some need-based financial aid, depending on the institution that the student is applying for. That's one reason I encourage you not to give up just by seeing these tables or to feel frustrated, because there is an answer to some questions that you'll have. One, because Virginia also offers grants to students and families that are pursuing higher education within the Commonwealth. So that is an additional opportunity to secure some funding based upon the institution that the student is going in, or some other qualifiers that you can see here on this screen. For students who are filling out the FAFSA, that will determine your eligibility for the first two grants on our screen. So the Commonwealth Award and Guaranteed Assistance Program, with the Guaranteed Assistance Program having an additional merit requirement. So sometimes as you work through this process, you'll see that some grants are dependent upon need as determined by the student aid index. Some are dependent upon merit or GPA. Some may have both. And then you'll have other grants that have additional requirements as well, both for the federal government in the slide that I showed before. Those are not the only federal grants that are available. Those are just the most common. The same thing is true for this slide for Virginia grants. These are not the only grants that the Commonwealth gives out to students pursuing post-secondary education. These are just the most common that we see in this process. VTAG is not based on need. It is literally based on whether or not the student is enrolling at a private college or university. There's a form that you fill out. Typically for seniors this year, you'll be filling it out over the summer between your senior year of high school and your freshman year of college. That awards $5,000 for students who are enrolling full-time at a private college or university in the Commonwealth. There's a junior college transfer grant. So for anybody going into, say, their local Nova campus and completing their associate's degree before transferring into a four-year school, $1,000 and up, depending on the institution you transfer into. And as long as you maintain a minimum GPA, you'll be eligible for those funds. The Workforce Credential Grant for any student who's interested in shorter term certifications. If your student gets towards the middle of this year, end of this year, and they're feeling burnt out from the educational process, a short-term credential could be a way to keep them engaged in post-secondary education, especially if the degree program is stackable. And maybe get them back into a full-time program further down the road. And then the Virginia Military Survivors Independence Education Program is not based on need. It's based on the parent's service. So similar to the federal program, if the student lost a parent or guardian in active duty service to our country, the student themselves is eligible for funding through this program at any Virginia public college or university. But in addition, in an expansion of what the federal program offers, if the veteran in the household has a service-connected disability and their disability rating is 90% or greater, their children and their spouse, if they already do not have a bachelor's degree, are also eligible for funding through this program. There's a separate application that the student will initiate through the Department of Veteran Services to get access to these funds. But again, it's not based upon the student aid index, similar to the federal program. It's literally based upon the parent service and sacrifice for our country. The Virginia Alternative State Aid Application is another form that I mentioned earlier in my presentation. Again, this form is not for every Virginian. The only Virginians who should consider using this form to apply for aid are those who are ineligible to receive federal aid. So again, students who are undocumented, students who are in the process of moving from a more temporary visa status here in the US. So maybe they were admitted conditionally into the US, but their case for asylum is pending. If the student is in that position, even if they have a social security number, if that card says for work authorization only, that means they're not quite at the point where they can be eligible for federal aid. So they would start their process of applying for aid with TVASA, looking at in-state institutions. Similar to the FAFSA, it will generate the Student Aid Index, or SAI, and state aid can be awarded. Institutional aid, though, is not guaranteed. So as students are looking at their college choices and building their list, if a student is going to be using the VESA to apply for state aid and to build a school or to college in Virginia, you need to look at each individual college or university to see if they'll award institutional aid through submission of the VESA. Legal status of parents, just like for the FAFSA, does not matter in this process. But you do need 2 years of Virginia State tax returns and had to spend at least 2 years in a Virginia high school, in addition to graduating from Virginia high school generally to be eligible for these funds. But that's only, again, for students who are not eligible to receive federal aid. If a student is eligible to receive federal aid, forget about this form. Don't fill it out. Don't try to use it in the process of applying for aid. Similarly, though, for an undocumented student, if you're looking at schools inside of the Commonwealth of Virginia and outside of it, you'll fill out the VESA and list Virginia schools only. You only have an option to list Virginia schools on this form, but you'll fill out the FAFSA for any schools that you're looking at outside of the Commonwealth. And just don't list your Virginia schools on your FAFSA at that point. From there, if you're not sure which direction to go in, the SHAB's website, which houses the VESA, has a helpful guide through the screenshot of what that looks like when you log onto their site, and it will direct you through, which form you should file in this process. And again, if you have questions, please ask your college career counselor. They'll help you navigate this form. And if you're not sure which direction to go in, you can reach out to me and we can talk and have a meeting, and we'll discuss which direction you should move in this process. And again, if you're eligible to complete the FAFSA, you should complete it so you can be considered for federal, state, and institutional aid. If you complete the FAFSA and the VESA, Virginia institutions will ignore the VESA application results, which is why I mentioned for undocumented students, if you're filling out the FAFSA for schools outside of Virginia, just don't list your Virginia schools in this process. The CSS profile is another form you may see. It is a product of the College Board, so it is the one form that may cost money in the process of applying for financial aid. If the student used a fee waiver to sign up for an SAT test and took that test, they should get a waiver for the CSS profile, as well as automatically loaded up into their College Board account. If that does not happen, I strongly encourage the student to follow up with the College Board, because they should be getting a waiver if they got a waiver and used a waiver to sign up and take an SAT test. There are some colleges that have purchased waivers for students to fill out the profile, but not every college that is requesting it has. So you have to follow up with each individual college or university that the student is applying to see if they pre-purchased waivers and if they'll grant those fee waivers to students. But for those that are asking for it, first submission is $25. Each additional submission is $16. Again, this is the one place where it is essentially okay. I don't know that I agree with paying for it. That's neither here nor there. This is the one place where paying to work through the financial aid process may be required. So just keep that in mind as you work through this process. Anywhere else in the process of applying for financial aid, filling out scholarships that ask you for money is a no-go from my end. It's not worth it at that point, because you shouldn't pay for free. So one of the asks of the profile is that it essentially asks for a lot more information than the FAFSA or the VESA will. And it incorporates non-custodial parent information in ways that the FAFSA does not. So this usually surprises students, especially if their parents split up 15 or 20 years ago. Why they're being asked to include non-custodial parent information on that form. It's just information that the profile requests. To be honest, you can ask for a waiver for the non-custodial parent information, but those waivers have to be approved by the college or university that is requesting the profile. It's not something the CSS profile itself can accept. And then it's up to each school literally that is requesting the form. And on the next slide, I'll show the schools that were asking for this form in Virginia. Again, it's not every college or university. It's only a handful of schools in the Commonwealth. Of note, the publics that do are William and Mary and the University of Virginia. The other schools on this list are private institutions, and the profile is typically only requested for the first year that the student is entering into that institution. This is not a form, unlike the FAFSA or the VESA, depending on which the student is filling out, that they'll have to complete each year. The CSS profile typically is a one-time form that's requested in this process. And again, some, like William and Mary profile doesn't ask for non-custodial parent information, but UVA and the University of Richmond do. So you might not need the waiver for one school versus needing to request a waiver for another. Generally speaking, if there is a legal reason that the student doesn't have contact with a non-custodial parent, if there's fear for their safety or well-being, and that's why contact is not had with that non-custodial parent. Those are the occasions that I've seen the waiver get approved pretty quickly. Other than that, I haven't really seen it getting accepted on an institution by institution basis. So typically only if there's a fear for the safety or well-being of the student, essentially, or if there has been literally no contact. You do have to document that in a way, and there's no way to reach that non-custodial parent. But again, it's up to the institution at that point if they're going to accept that in this process. So just be careful. Again, for the institutions that are accepting it, it's not every institution that's asking for it, but you do have to request a waiver for those that are asking for non-custodial parent information, and then it's up to each institution to say yes or no as to whether or not they'll accept that waiver. From there, as you're going through the process of receiving financial aid, one of the things I always spend time talking to students and families about are federal student loans, because that is one way that students pay for their education. And for the vast majority of students who are going into a four-year college or university, most of them, if not all of them, are having to borrow money and or work, or their parents are supporting them in terms of covering their total cost of attendance. These interest rates for these loans are fixed each year. They're set typically around July 1st and announced between July 1st and August 1st, depending on the year that we're talking about. For students who receive direct subsidized loans, that is need-based, so it's based upon the student aid index that the student will get from submitting their FAFSA and having that completed and processed. As long as the student is enrolled, making progress towards a degree on at least a part-time, half-time basis, the interest that technically is accumulating will be paid by the Department of Education on the student's behalf. If the student ever drops below half-time enrollment before completing their degree, interest will start accumulating on subsidized loans. Something I mentioned because life happens, and sometimes students are surprised if they have subsidized loans only, and they drop to half-time enrollment, or say a parent gets sick, so they stop out of their educational journey for a year to help take care of that parent. Then interest starts accumulating after that 6 month period has lapsed. So just be careful with that. But generally speaking, as long as a student is enrolled at least half time making progress towards a degree, then they won't see any interest for subsidized loans at all until 6 months after graduation, when repayment starts and interest will start accumulating at that point. That's no longer paid by the Department of Education. For unsubsidized loans, those are non-need-based loans. So the student aid index does not matter in the context of unsubsidized loans. Interest does accumulate from the day that that loan is dispersed, and that interest is not paid by the Department of Education. So you'll see differences in the loan amounts essentially year over year once that money is dispersed. And then under the Direct Plus Loan Program, more relevant for parents, especially with seniors that are in high school, the Parent Plus Loan Program is one way you may be asked to close the gap between the aid that the college university is providing through federal, state, and institutional sources and what the total cost of attendance is. 3 words of caution here. One is that there's a credit check that the parent that is requesting these funds for the student has to pass to be eligible to borrow these funds on the student's behalf. The interest rate is higher, so second word of caution, than direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. And then 3, not on my screen, but unlike subsidized and unsubsidized loans where repayment starts 6 months after graduation or when the student has stopped out or dropped to less than half-time enrollment, the first payment on Parent Plus loans is due 30 to 45 days after that loan is dispersed. So the example I'll use is that for a senior enrolling in college in the fall, say the Parent Plus loan is dispersed August 1st to help pay for the fall semester expenses. The first payment will be due September 15th, maybe October 1st of that same, within 2 months of the money being dispersed and hitting the student's account. So it's a lot faster in this process and very different than what students are expected to pay back. And those funds are borrowed in the parent's name. So whatever arrangement parents you have with your kids to pay off these funds, Legally, the Department of Education is looking at you as the borrower and the person responsible for paying back these funds. Even if your kid agrees to pay, get a part-time job, help you pay back these funds, Department of Education, that does not matter to them. They'll look at you as the person borrowing these funds and the one being responsible for paying it back. Some colleges and universities are really great about pointing out when they're asking parents to take out a Parent Plus loan on their students' behalf. Others don't do the best job of highlighting that that's what they're doing to help close the gap between the aid they're offering and the total cost of attendance. So just be careful. It's a word of caution as you're looking at financial aid award letters later in the spring. Once you submit your FAFSA, there are some things you'll hear about fairly quickly. The same thing for the VESA. So what is the student aid index for the FAFSA? What eligibility may there be for Pell? Are you eligible for subsidized, unsubsidized loans? For the VESA, possibly what is, well, not possibly, what is your student aid index? And then also what are some of the state grants you may be eligible for based on that? But other than that, say you're submitting in December, when these forms will go live December 1st. College and universities will not give information back to you typically until no sooner than mid-February, but typically we're talking mid-March at that point. So there is a delay between, especially if you file your FAFSA early in December, even if it's processed December 5th, you will typically be waiting until around March 1st to start hearing back from college and universities, because the college and university waits until the student is offered an admission, and then they start processing FAFSAs for admitted students at that point. So it's not an automatic reply when the student is admitted. Some college and universities try to send out financial aid award letters 2 to 3 weeks after admission decisions are made, but it's an institution by institution policy. So as you're looking through the deadlines for admission, whether it's early action, early decision, regular decision, or admission, one, pay attention to those priority deadlines for financial aid, but know that generally speaking, it's not going to be an automatic response from the institution. You'll have to wait in this process of receiving additional follow-up from the school. So what can students do? No matter the grade that the student is in, they can look for scholarships. Why? For a few different reasons. One, there's $7.1 billion in private funding available to students to apply for, to receive, to help them pay for post-secondary expenses. Two, over 100 million goes unawarded every year. And the main reason that these funds go unawarded is simply because students don't apply. Eligible students for these funds do not apply. So when I meet with students and families and we talk about searching for scholarships and how to navigate this process, I advise that you start local. You start by having a conversation with your college career counselor, your school counselor, asking them what local scholarships the last few years of seniors have received. What are maybe some of the awards, scholarship awards that the class of 2024 they felt was really competitive for. And those are the scholarships that absolutely should be on your students list. Because if somebody in the previous year or somebody in the previous 3 years has received these funds, that means either the scholarship is directed towards students at your school or in your community, or because of the opportunities that your school has given to students very generally, they're just more competitive for these funds. So scholarships like that should absolutely be on your list. And then look regionally, think about where parents work. If students have a part-time job, there could be scholarships they're eligible for based upon their employment. Oftentimes, especially when I'm meeting with students around this time of the year, seniors get discouraged because they're filling out a lot of scholarship applications, but they're not hearing back. One, because sometimes organizations won't get back to you until the spring. So that may be part of it, why you're not hearing back anything right now. And two, some scholarship organizations will have scholarships that go up in the beginning of September, and they'll do a drawing based on the applications received in September, and they'll make an announcement, but then they take that scholarship down. For students that are applying in scholarship application for scholarships like that with applications, you'll just need to not just get discouraged. I know that it can be easy to get discouraged when you get rejection after rejection in this process, but it only takes a few scholarships to turn this around. So you have to keep focused, to be persistent in this process of working through and applying for scholarships, and don't set a limit for yourself. Parents, if your kids get $30,000 in private scholarships to help them pay for college, that's not enough. for most schools. So congratulate them, thank them, tell them they did a great job, but encourage them to keep looking. There should be no upper limit that you set in this process. With schools that have a cost of attendance of $50, $60, $70, $80,000 a year. For me, that means there should be no limit as students are navigating this process of applying for scholarships. The more scholarships they get, the easier it will be to pay for their post-secondary education. The less parents will have to contribute on their end in either funds they've saved or funds they're borrowing to help their student pay for college. So word of advice in this process is to stay organized. Parents, this is where we can help our kids out. Some students are on top of everything and they are organized and they keep everything together. Sometimes our kids hold us to account and keep us organized. If that's the case for you, your student's going to be fine in this process. They're going to keep up with everything in terms of their scholarships. You don't have to worry about it, but check in with them from time to time. On the other hand, if you as parents are making sure your kids are waking up on time, getting to the school bus or getting them dropped off at school on time, if you're reminding them about upcoming assignments, if you're making sure they don't miss a practice or a recital, and helping them to keep on time, they may need a little bit of your assistance to keep them organized and on pace in this process as well. This is an opportunity for students and parents to talk about what their goals are in terms of applying for scholarships, but for both students and parents to be honest about where you can help. For some parents, they feel lost in this process because their kids are not engaging them in the process of looking for scholarships. Parents, this is where you make you ask of your kids, how can you help? How can you be involved? How can you help them navigate this process? Sometimes it's just helping them stay organized, keeping track of everywhere that they apply for scholarships, and especially once they receive scholarships. It's interesting for me being in the position I am now, having worked through various different scholarship organizations over the years. You'd be surprised how many students never request scholarship funds that they received. That does happen. And sometimes it's just because they lost track of the organization they received the scholarship dollars from. And parents, this is where you can help keep your kids organized in this process. If you know they received $2,000 from a local Lions club, keep that information organized for your kid. And that way, when they go to enroll in college in the fall, because they have all these other things that they're working through this process, they may forget about it. But if you have it, you can help remind them as they head towards August and the fall semester beginning to request those funds from that organization. Again, like I mentioned, start local, talk to your school counselor. For students, think about where your parents work. For parents, think about where you work. If you've never accessed educational benefits through your employer, you may not know they exist. Think about the regional organizations, associations that your employers belong to. If you're a part of a union, think about those structures. Civic organizations that you're engaged in, think about your faith if you practice one and what larger associations that faith practice belongs to. There are scholarships offered in many different places and from many different directions in this process. And as long as they don't charge you to apply or to receive those funds, that is a scholarship worth applying for if it fits the student and their need to pay for their education. Some deadlines are early on in senior year, so you may find, especially if you're starting in this process now, that some deadlines have passed you. Again, don't get discouraged. That just means you missed out on this opportunity for this year. But note that if that scholarship is an award that's reviewed for every year, and current college students can apply for it, just because you missed a deadline this year does not mean that that scholarship should not be on your list as a college freshman to apply for next year. You just know that the deadline's early, so you need to be on top of that as you begin your fall semester for the next academic year. These are search engines that we recommend using in this process. They're certainly not all that are available out there. So when you work through this process of applying for scholarships, use these sites and more. As you look for opportunities to pay for your education. For students, as they're building profiles on these sites, the more specific they can be, the better. Example I always use for a senior that's graduating in the class of 2025, if they literally just put in their name, class of 2025, their high school, and they want to go to a four-year college university, their scholarship results will be very generic. And some scholarships may apply to them. They may have success in applying for and receiving these scholarship awards. But generally speaking, the results are going to be non-specific to them. And that's one reason that students are also discouraged in this process, because they were not specific enough when they were building these profiles on these sites to get results that are tailored to them, and for scholarships that both fit them and that they're eligible to receive in this process as well. So just be careful as your students are building these profiles. Make sure they're adding in enough information to make sure that the scholarships they're being matched with are a good fit in this process. But again, there's no limit. There's no cap to this. And again, these are not the only sites that are out there. So Google is your friend in this process. And again, as long as a scholarship is not asking for you to pay to access a scholarship site or pay to apply for a scholarship or requesting ACH or credit card information in this process, then that is a scholarship worth it. And I say that because these sites, while great tools, are not perfect. So every now and then, a scholarship that is asking for you to pay for it to apply will pop up in some of these sites. So just be careful, and especially for the students that are working through this process. General rule of thumb, you should not pay for free when applying for scholarships. And then last, I'll end with family discussions that I want to encourage all of you to have. If your household was anything like mine growing up, it was none of my business as a child what money was coming in, how my mom paid her bills on a month-by-month basis, what went into the household budget. If that's your household, I'm not telling you to change that. I am talking to your kid. I am encouraging you to talk to your kids about budgeting. And even if you as the parent did not go to college, if you have a mortgage, if you have a car note, if you borrowed funds for anything, medical expenses, you have seen numbers that are similar to numbers that your son or daughter will see in this process. For students who are looking at borrowing money to pay for post-secondary education, typically they've never seen $5,000, $10,000, $50,000 on either sheet of paper or on the screen in terms of what they're being asked to take out to pay for anything. So no matter your life experience up to this point, this is where you can help your son or daughter understand what those borrowed amounts mean, both in terms of what they'll need to be expected to pay back down the road, but also some of the sacrifices they may have to make in their budget down the road if they choose to borrow X amount of dollars and go to any particular school. So have conversations about money. Talk about budgeting. For parents, let your kids know what it costs to feed them, clothe them, keep them housed, keep them connected to the internet. Because for any kids watching this presentation, whether you know it or not, you're expensive. That's okay. We as your parents love you. But it's an opportunity for parents to share. One, because ideally, parents, you won't be providing and covering these expenses for the rest of your kid's life. This is an opportunity to help them understand what they need to do to provide for themselves as they move out of your home, especially if they're moving onto a campus for a four-year education. Because at the end of the day, I don't want them calling you in October or November asking for $3,000 or they're having to drop out, especially if you're already helping pay for some of their expenses that semester. And two, I would imagine that for most parents whose kids are moving out to go away to college, you're not expecting them to move back in 4 to 5 years from now. So we want to help them understand money now and responsible borrowing on the front end before they make a decision about where they go to college. So have conversations about budgeting, have conversations about money, especially if you're not used to that in your household. And talk about that throughout the year as the student is applying as a senior for college admission, as they're looking at what their net price might be in terms of this process of receiving financial aid, as they're looking for scholarships. Help your kid understand what these numbers boil down to at the end of the day, because you may have thought about it, what it's going to look like when my son gets married, when he goes to buy his own house, when he wants to have kids in the future, when he wants to buy his own car. Your kid may have never thought about it. On the opposite end, kids may have thought about it, but if you're not talking about money and what the decisions that a student could make with student loans and how that can impact their future, you're doing everybody a disservice in this process. So talk to your kids about money and about budgeting. It's something I wish I would have done more with my mom. I developed some unhealthy habits as a teenager that it took some time to recover from, and some of those habits still come back to me every now and then as an adult. So talk about money, and talk about budgeting. And parents answer questions that your kids have about finances. And where you don't know, go to resources that can help you answer questions that come up in this process. And just make sure that everybody's keeping on the same page. Because at the end of the day, I don't want parents feeling like you're in a position where you have to make this cost of attendance thing work for your student in terms of paying for their education. For any students listening to this presentation, your parents also are not responsible for paying for your post-secondary education. It is in your hands in terms of what the cost is to you. If your parents are in a position where they can help, that's great. But legally, they're not required to. So don't expect it of them. If they can, that's great. Thank them for that. But that's the end of my formal presentation for this evening. But I will say, if you want to learn more, you can reach out to me at the College Place. Definitely, seniors, sign up for a time to meet with your college and career counselor if you have questions, especially when they're not asking you to come in. If they have downtime, if there's any sense of that on their calendars, make sure you're stopping by and asking questions when those come up. Parents, if you have questions, you can utilize your college career counselor at your student's high school as well. Just make sure you're encouraging your student to initiate that conversation. We want to get them used to having those conversations and asking for that information on their own behalf. You can definitely attend future virtual workshops that will be offered in conjunction between Prince William County Schools and the College Place. And I'll be on site on Thursday for the College Fair doing Tiny Talks. And then there will be some hands-on FAFSA completion workshops for those of you who are currently seniors as the FAFSA goes live, but most of those are being scheduled for the spring. So think more January than December at that end. And then if you want more information from me, you can scan this QR code again to sign your student up. For more information from the College Place, parents, you're more than welcome to call me or email me. I know your kids may be more comfortable with sending a text message. Any method of communication is fine. Right now, while I have a lot of presentations and workshops going on, it may take me a little bit of time to get back to you. So if you send me a message this evening and you don't hear back from me by tomorrow, that's probably going to happen because I've got a lot of workshops this week. But give me at least 48 to 72 hours to get back to you, and I'll get back to you as you navigate and work through this process.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's always a pleasure for you to join us. And for everyone, Jason will be joining us again throughout the year for other sessions. So we invite you to continue to look on our website just to see the sessions coming up. And I did notice that there's 2 hands raised. So Ms. Shayna, if you would like to come off mute.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So, it's been since the 90s when I was in college. So I have a question. For the Parent Plus loans, are they dispersed by year? Or is it like a one-time, is it a one-time loan for the 4 years, or is it one loan per year?
That's a good question. So when you go through the process of requesting a Parent Plus loan, it is literally for the academic year that's on hand in this process.
Okay.
We also have a question from Sabza. Do you want to come off mute?
Yes. Hello,
Go
good
ahead.
evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I have a question. My son is senior, and also we are immigrant here almost 3 years. And I'm always worried about his future. And I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to apply for a scholarship, for financial aid. And then this is my question, how to do it. If I need help, should I go to talk with his counselor or email for somebody? And also my English is not perfect. I always join to, that if I receive any meeting from the county or from school, but I understand just a little bit.
So I will say you're in the right place. Definitely signing up for to request more information from the college career counselor is a great place to start. If your son or you wants a meeting with me, We can set up a time to discuss and plan a strategy for how to navigate this process. And for your son, as long as your son falls into one of the categories that I mentioned earlier in my presentation, he's eligible to receive federal, state, and institutional aid. Even if other family members are in flux or in process, that doesn't matter as long as the student status is established. That is a primary driver in this process.
Sabsa, I was also going to say, if you need help with the translation or the information that's going home, or if you need assistance with an interpreter, when you go into the school, you have the right to request that of the school, and they will provide someone for you.
Oh, okay. And also that, I think that George Mason, they have the new program, and also they accept my son. But now I'm thinking if that program is free or not free. Should I fill out this application or no? I'm always worried as a mother.
Yeah, so I'll chime in here too. That is the direct admission George Mason application. So congratulations to your son and his hard work, and to you as well. And so that is inviting him to apply to George Mason, where he will be automatically admitted. You still need to complete the FAFSA. And the college will give you and your son an award package. It's kind of like a receipt broken down of the expenses of the college and what aid you qualify for to help cover those expenses. And that doesn't typically come out until March.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for all your information.
Yes, definitely be applying for scholarships, and look also at the George Mason website for scholarships as well. Meeting with the college and career counselor and requesting a translator to be there with you and your son will be really beneficial.
Okay, I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Alyssa, we do have a question in the Q&A. It says, what should we be doing when our kid is in the 9th grade to be better prepared for the financial aid process?
Yes.
Yep, that's a great question. So the scholarship sites that I recommended typically don't have an age requirement. So someone in the 9th grade can start looking for scholarships now. There's a site that's not on that slide, but it's called Raise Me, RAISEME. It's a micro scholarship site that a lot of colleges, universities in Virginia partner with. And the student builds a locker on that site, and they add information in as they go through their high school years. And it essentially secures micro scholarships as they add more information in. And as long as they apply to get admitted into those institutions, matriculate at the institution, those micro scholarships will be available. Those funds will be available for them to use to pay for their cost of attendance. So that's something that a 9th grader can do right now, or a 10th grader, as an example, to get started in this process. And there's not as many scholarships through these websites that will be available for freshman or sophomore students, but they are out there. So someone can get started now. The FAFSA does need to wait, and the VESA would need to wait until your senior year of high school. But for scholarships in general, you can start looking now.
We had another question in the chat. Can you just go over what the Plus Parent Loan is?
So the Parent Plus Loan are funds that are given to provided through the parent to the student to pay for their education. So the funds will be dispersed to the college or university that the student is enrolling in. But the Parent Plus Loan requires the parent to pass a credit check. And as long as they pass that credit check, whatever funds are borrowed at that point, the parent is then responsible for paying back. So it's funds the parent borrows on their student's behalf to pay for their education, but then the parent is responsible for repayment at that point. And again, that first payment is due typically 30 to 45 days after the loan is dispersed.
All right, we're going to take a couple more questions. I see a couple hands raised, and then any additional questions, I'll do a follow-up email tomorrow with this information, PowerPoint presentation, and video recording. If you have additional questions, please feel free. Peace Joy, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, two questions. Do you have any referral to help with the college application? Because we really need help for that. Is there any organization that helps to do the essay or added the essay or help a student know how to research to come up with the 6 to 8 college list? The second question is, my kids is a senior 12th grader, and since the result of the financial aid is April or March, does it mean she does not need to do November 1st and December 1st early decision, early action? She will only wait for the regular regular submission deadline for this college application, so that by the time she receives the college finance package, then she will know which one to pick. If she pick the December 1st early decision, early action, this deadline, even though she get the offer from college, but she doesn't know if she can be fully funded or receive how much percentage of the financial aid, then what's the point of to apply earlier? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pishoy, for asking those questions. I get this question often, especially when talking to students and families that are thinking about and considering applying early decision and early action. Early decision is a binding admission program that essentially is asking the student to commit to the institution if they're accepted, regardless of the financial aid that is provided to the student. So if financial aid is not a concern for the student or family, I would imagine we probably wouldn't be here for this session this evening. But then I would encourage the student to apply early decision. If they're at all worried about how they're going to pay for their education, I would apply early action. It's a non-binding admission program, which means that the student will get the admission decision early, sometimes as early as December 15th. But they can wait until they receive the financial aid package that Alyssa was mentioning earlier in March before making the decision by May 1st. So students absolutely do not have to wait until regular decision because the admission and financial aid timelines are operating concurrently, but at different points in the senior year. So a student can apply early action, get admitted, and complete their FAFSA December 1st. But again, they just wouldn't receive the financial aid package until sometime in March, typically. And you can use that information at that point to make a decision by May 1st. For help with your essay, I would start with a college career counselor. Your English teacher can provide great pointers on grammar, syntax, word structure, if the paragraph structure, if it makes sense. But English teachers are not always the best editors for the college essay because the college essay asks students to break the rules that English teachers teach them in terms of how to write, introduce the topic, talk about a topic, draw a conclusion in terms of their argument. I was just doing a workshop on the college essay yesterday with some students and families. Well, some students and in Harrisonburg, and that was one of my main points to them. Students have gotten so used to the structure that their English teachers have taught them about how to write and craft and create an argument in their English class. That is not the process to replicate when it comes to the college essay. You're more than welcome to reach out to me if you need help and support and guidance to this process. I can offer pointers and tips. And then again, utilize your college career counselor. They're a great resource that's at your school to help you navigate this process as well.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question. Khalid Faiz, if you can come off mute.
Hey, good evening. First of all, thanks for Mr. Jason for those good information. Actually, I have selected for direct admission in George Mason. When they sent me an application, the application took me through to the international student because of my immigration status, because I'm still in asylum, pending asylum case. So at this point, am I able to apply for FAFSA or with the one with this VSA? I can't pronounce that.
That's okay, Khalid. So yes, based on your current status now, I would use the VESA, so the Virginia Alternative State Aid application, to begin the process of applying for aid. If your status adjusts at any point during the senior year, or really any point by June 30th of 2026, any federal aid that you would be eligible for to help you pay for your freshman year of college could be awarded. Sometimes pending for an asylum case means that the resolution is right around the corner, so a month or two from now.
I understand
Sometimes
that is residential is matter that we applying for FAFSA because I'm here since 2021 in Virginia. So
Khalid, is your family from Afghanistan?
Yeah, they're from Afghanistan.
Okay. And you came in 2021?
Yeah, I came into 21.
Okay. So the withdrawal
Was it?
from with the US withdrawal from
Yeah,
Afghanistan?
with those. So
Okay.
yeah, that's the same
So
situation that we have got
you
here.
were actually in a special category, essentially, for your status. You were eligible to receive federal aid. So
FAFSA?
you would fill out the FAFSA, create your federal student aid ID. You may run across a college or two who is not familiar with your status. There's documentation from the Department of Defense that you can use. And there's a Dear Colleague letter that the Department of Education has sent out for students on your behalf, but that you can use to make sure you're eligible for federal, state, and institutional aid.
Right, that's cool. I just don't want to miss the direct admission which I selected for George Mason because it's kind of close to my house. I don't want to miss. I want to stay with my parents at this age. So George Mason would be a good choice for me to go there. But the only problem is that the financial stuff, you know.
Yes, definitely complete the George Mason application, and that's your first step. And then you'll complete the FAFSA in December, and you would have done those main components that are needed. And then obviously keep looking out for scholarships. We post them in Naviance in Prince William County for any local scholarships, of course. But do those things and you're right on track.
All right, thank you so much, and also thanks for Mr. Jason again. I have your email. I'll contact with you, of course.
Awesome. Thank you, Khalid.
Thank
All
you.
right, well, thanks again to Jason for joining us. And we have placed the survey in the chat for today's session. Please let us know how we're doing. Any interest on any future sessions that you may want us to bring on here. And thank you to Alyssa also for joining us. She's been the one answering your questions in the chat and the Q&A. So thank you all for joining us this evening, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Good night.